Humans and Pokemon, a partnership that can't be stressed enough in the Pokemon world, whether it's the iconic Red in his Charizard or the notorious Tobias in his Darkrai. These bonds of trainers and their Pokemon are shown to us time and time again, with the separate beings working as one to achieve their goals. But what if these separate beings crossed the line and truly became one? That's right, gang, we're talking about humans fusing with Pokemon. Cool fistfights, hand beams, blood, and all forms of tactics that you would never expect to see from Pokemon. Which brings us to the topic of today's video, Pokémon ReBURST, the manga that's all about this exact premise, entering the pages of Japanese teens manga all across the nation. But before we can talk about the story and all of that stuff, we're gonna need to do a bit of background checking to find out how this manga even came to be, and why it's now a manga Pokemon would rather you forget. Our story starts in the wonderful year of 2011, and just a few months back, Pokemon Black and White had been released on the Nintendo DS systems. Two pretty great results from the fans. The games chose to go for a more serious plotline, bringing up the ethics of catching Pokemon and using Pokemon for human benefit. Director Junichi Masuda and writer Toshinobu Matsumiya were hoping to keep Pokemon growing alongside its players. If they started playing with the first games, they would now be reaching young adult status. And whilst the reception was already solid, outside some complaints, Pokemon wanted to push this agenda more. The anime that had started airing at this time was completely perfect for kids, with Ash's journey truly feeling like a fresh start, just like in Kanto. But they took the fresh start bit a bit too literally. As for the manga, they were all featured in their usual go-to magazine, Koro Comics, which was also tailored towards kids. But now, Pokemon decided they were going to take a leap and experiment, in a way never done before. Which brings us to January, as at the Josei World Hobby Fair, promotion had begun on a new Pokemon manga. This usually wouldn't be that big of a deal, but this time things were different. Unlike all the previous manga before it, this manga would not be running in Koro. Instead, this manga would be running in a weekly Shonen Sunday. Now, you may not know what this magazine is, so instead I'll tell you some of the major mangas and anime that have sprung from it. For example, Magi, Labyrinth of Magic, Freerun, Beyond Journey's End, and Komi Can't Communicate. A simple change in magazine, however, is not going to be enough to make your manga do better with older audiences, so they were going to have to change up things with their format too. So March rolls around, and whilst Black and White are dropping in America, Japan are getting their first chapter of the new manga series, Pokémon ReBURST. Created by writer Jun Kusade, whose only known work is this manga, and artist Mitsuhisa Tamura, creator of Bakugamon, and the appearance of the Yellow Dragon. Pokémon ReBURST was a unique take on the Pokémon world, and you'll see why as I break down the first chapter. We follow the main character, Ryoga, as he leaves his home village in order to find his father, and a mysterious warrior known as Arcadus. And I just want to quickly say, right off the bat, you can really see they were trying to gas this manga up. For a highly serious new series, and let the unbelievable developments amaze you, immediately catching my eye. The chapter opens up with Ryoga doing some insane training, telling you right off the bat once again that this isn't your usual Pokemon. Whilst he does that, we learn the rules of the village he's from. To go out and explore the world, you have to pass a ceremonial trial. This trial involves taking notes on Pokemon and cultivating crops. We also get to learn a bit about the boy's backstory. In the past, Ryoga was separated from his father, who disappeared to where Arcadus is. Arcadus tells Ryoga to give up on meeting his father, but like the shonen main character he is, he refuses, vowing to get stronger in order to meet his dad once again. And by now, I'm pretty sure Arcadus is meant to represent, or straight up is, Arceus, which is a cool way of utilizing the Pokemon. Ryoga meets a girl by the name of Miruto, who's doing her own mission, and he brings her to the village. After showcasing his inhumane strength, he passes the test. So with that, Ryoga prepares to head off on his quest, and receives a special box that once belonged to his father. All the villagers are making a big deal out of things, and Miruto notes that this is pretty normal, which is of course how we see things too. After all, in the games, kids set off on their journeys all the time. Now, you may have noticed something. I've been yapping for a while now, but we've yet to see a single Pokemon in this story. Best we've had is seeing Miruto hold a Pokeball. Well, as we see in our first city, this world isn't all sunshine and rainbows, as people have their Pokemon get stolen by an organization known as the Great Gavel. And these guys use straight hands on anyone, even using laser guns. So when Ryoga pulls up, he also uses straight hands. One of the villains though has a massive weapon, and by connecting it to a cage, grants him the power of the fire Pokemon that were trapped inside, with the cost being the life energy of the Pokemon. Ryoga gets absolutely whooped, but is saved luckily by Miruto. When the time for a rematch comes around, Ryoga uses the special box he received, but rather than a Pokeball, there's a stone inside. and just like you would with a keystone, Ryoga activates it. The stone electrifies his body as he begins to transform, or rather fuse, with the legendary black dragon of Unova, Zekrom. The villain recognizes this phenomenon as a burst, and with his newfound power, he easily takes the victory, bringing the first chapter to an end. And that's the main gist of the manga. Each chapter, Ryoga runs into new characters who chances are have the ability to burst. And whilst most of them are foes using their power for their own evil greed, some of them are allies. Which brings us on to the next topic of the manga, its characters. First off, we have Ryoga, of course your typical never say die shonen protagonist, who wants to meet his father in Arcadus. As he travels the world, he encounters many different types of people and never hesitates to help those in need, which can lead to him getting manipulated over and over again. Ryoga himself is a physical beast, like this guy is built insanely different. In chapter 3, he has to climb a massive mountain, and whilst the train is being lifted by that Galvantula, Ryoga decides to climb it with his bare hands, not to mention also carrying Miruto. As he meets more people, his team of friends keeps growing, due to his kind-hearted nature. Also, his main trait is that he doesn't believe in impossible. If you tell him something is impossible, he'll do everything in his power to prove you wrong. He's likable, but at the same time more of a trope than an actual character. Miruto, the second main character. She's your typical female ally, who acts as the smarts behind the MC's rashness, also helping him out in battles with her knowledge. Miruto works for an unknown organization, as she investigates crimes across the region. We also don't find out anything about this organization or her past, so yeah, that kinda just sucks. And of course we can't forget, she's the main love interest with light tsundere traits. So once again, more of a trope than a character. Gappy, the comic relief scumbag. I hate him and I'm not gonna give him any praise. He sucks and constantly manipulates others. There's a running gag that goes on that he looks like a pansage, and yeah, I can't deny, he does. More importantly, there's a really satisfying panel where Ryoga kicks him clean in the face, and that was amazing. Hariru and Corolla, the super cool rival and his cute sidekick. The two of them start out as enemies to Ryoga's crew, as they're working for the Great Gavel in order to get revenge on Arcadus for destroying Hariru's village. In other words, he's on his Sasuke Uchiha. He has a burst with Zoroa, and she has a burst with Ember, which is pretty funny. Kurita, a ninja from a village where everyone's sick. He starts off as a small little guy, but grows spurts like crazy, a loyal ally with Excelgor as his burst. Rug, a bandit who lives by stealing and seduction. She starts off as an enemy, but joins the crew after realizing Ryoga's an actual nice guy. The secondary love interest with Purloin as her burst. And lastly, the Great Gavel organization. These guys are of course the villains. Whilst the lackeys are evil because evil, the group leader Fraud wants to create a peaceful world by gaining so much power, no one would dare test him. In other words, pretty lame motives, though he does have a sick design. There's of course other characters, like the 7 warriors of the Great Gavel, the friends of Ryoga's dad, and not to mention the reporter lady whose existence is pure fan service. A lot of the cast, whether it's main or side, do have some depth to them that tries to make them more interesting than simply being a flavor of character. But for the girls, they don't really have any character development at all. For some reason, they just stay the same for the whole story. Once again, pretty much only existing for fan service. Now it's time we talk about the elephant in the room. As you can already tell, this isn't your usual Pokemon story. In fact, Pokemon take the back seat for the majority of this manga, as the main form of battle is done by humans, whether it be through life-stealing weapons or of course the titular burst. The mechanic of bursting can only be done by having a burst heart. A burst heart is a crystal that Ryoga had, and inside is a sealed Pokemon. These can range from legendaries to just your regular Purloin. The lore behind the creation and destruction of burst hearts is kind of vague. Pokemon that are inside a burst heart can never escape this. But if it's an artificial burst heart, they can be broken and the Pokemon can escape. It's also never explained how they're formed either. For Zekrom, it just chose to seal itself. But for everyone else, they just got them passed down by their parents. Not everyone can use a burst. You have to go through rigorous training or else you can literally die, due to the strain it puts on a human body. This part of the manga is of course make or break for most people. You either like the concept of burst, or you absolutely hate it and don't even touch the manga. For myself, I'm surprisingly in the like department. I completely understand that Pokemon and humans mixing is pretty weird at face value, but with the way it works in the story, I can't help but respect it. Bursts aren't demonstrated as simply being items that everyone can get a hold of, like Pokeballs. Instead, they're more mythical. Most people have no idea what a burst is, and once they see the creature created, they can't help but be disgusted or scared, which I think is cool. And speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about the burst warriors that we see over the course of the manga, cause there's quite a few. As I mentioned prior, any Pokemon can become a burst heart, and the design of the created burst warrior is a mix of both the human and the Pokemon. For Ryoga and Zekrom, they look like a monster, and that's pretty much because they are. They're meant to look like a freak of nature that people would feel the power of just by looking at them, and they did a good job at that. For Hariru and Zorora, they look oddly cute, like a cosplay of sorts. And that's once again perfect. By himself, Hariru looks cool and strong, but once he bursts, he actually looks weaker, due to the type of Pokemon Zorora is. It's mischievous and tricks people through illusions. And that's of course represented not only by Hariru's burst appearance, but also his fighting style, which relies on tricks rather than just raw power. And the last one I'll talk about is Rug. As you saw, I used her on the thumbnail. A burst with Purloin isn't just for fan service though, although some of it definitely is. Purloin is a Pokemon that acts cute in order to deceive the people it's trying to steal from, and that's the exact same with Rug. Except, since she's a human, her design appeals more to the human taste. Her fighting style is also the same, with hit and run tactics, and even her signature move, Love Struck Capture, allowing her to take control of her foe. There's tons of other burst warriors, and all of their designs and powers are perfectly matched, either going for an opposite attract type beat or just matching designs. Like the Swords of Justice, the Terrakion and Virizion users look like their Pokemon, but the Cobalion kid literally has nothing about him that gives off Cobalion. But when he bursts, he somehow fits right in. So for that, I have to say I approve of the burst ability, at least for this manga, not saying I'd want it in the games. So that's the main gist of Pokemon ReBURST, a shonen manga where people and Pokemon fuse to fight against each other. Now the question is, why would Pokemon rather you forget about it, and how did this manga get received? Was it with tons of love heralding it as a masterpiece? Well, no. If it was, it probably would have been translated. In truth, this manga received very mixed opinions, and for all reasons. Reasons that will include spoilers, so be warned for anyone who wants to read the manga. First off, it didn't sell horrendously. After all, Weekly Shonen Sunday at the time was already on a decline compared to Korokoro, so they didn't have too much pressure on them to create peak chapters week after week, resulting with a series of 77 chapters and 8 volumes. But at the same time, it didn't become a massive success like they'd probably hoped for. And it could be potentially why we don't see Jun Kusade writing any mangas to this day. But that's just speculation. Some people really like the more serious story set in a world filled with issues. For example, the towns being attacked and the underground illegal experiments by the GG. And of course, we can't forget about the more intense battles that really push the boundaries on a Pokemon fight. Me personally, I live for this kind of thing, but I'm also 100% biased. The scenes in this manga go undeniably hard and have tons of hype moments. There's plenty of variation in the action as well. In fact, we get a whole entire Hunter x Hunter inspired tournament arc, where warriors have to steal each other's tags, escape a room as allies or foes, and fight on one in your beloved tournament grid stage. And in all these scenes, whether it's a battle, a joke, or a shocking moment, all the characters look like they're bursting with emotion. Pun not intended. The premise of fusing people and Pokemon was never going to be a big hit with everyone, with some finding the unique take to be welcomed and a good change of pace, but others finding it to be a bit too different to be truly called a Pokemon manga. In my opinion, they do a decent job at bringing the Pokemon elements into this manga. Type matchups play a part in battles, electric burst warriors can't hurt ground warriors, as well as different types having specific traits. Also, as a Gen 5 manga, every Pokemon is Unova only, but things aren't all positives. Sometimes trainers will have a Pokemon and use it like how we're meant to, for example Swanna for flight or Solosis for telekinetic movement. But more often than not, the Pokemon will just be there being useless whilst the trainer gets into a fight. As for the Pokemon kept inside the burst hearts, they don't get to have much personality at all, since they're sealed 24/7. If I remember correctly, the only burst Pokemon we see communicate with its owner is Zekrom, and I don't know if it's because it's a legendary or if it's because it's the main character's partner. They try to get us to believe that the hero warriors have a connection with their Pokemon, but it's kinda hard when we get moments without any build up. Some previous burst warriors just hand over their burst hearts like it's nothing, so I don't really know if the connection is truly the same as a trainer and a Pokemon. And of course, we can't forget about the writing, which is not a masterpiece at all. The truth is, it's your usual shonen story with plot twists and fights that are beyond predictable. And although not confirmed, I'm pretty sure there was tons of plot points that got abandoned or got rushed to come to a conclusion. Like I said, Miruto works for an unknown organization that we never hear about again. Also, like I said, the main antagonist Fraud has villainous motives that are based off pure insanity, which can work sometimes, but in this case, fell kinda flat. He wants to have so much power that he can unite the world and stop all conflict through oppression. But since he failed to do that through the Great Gavel, he instead sees the power of Arcadus to just make a clean slate of everything. These kind of moves can make an entertaining villain, but here it kind of felt like a cheap excuse to wrap up the story. But even with this being the case, I've got to admit, I like Pokémon ReBURST. I know it's got a ton of flaws, as well as a ton of things not being explained well, or at all, and I understand that can make the reading less enjoyable. But at the same time, I'm literally the target audience for this type of story, so I really did enjoy it. Hariru and Ryoga are my favourite characters, which isn't too surprising as they both have the most amount of development. For Hariru, he followed Great Gavel even though he knew they were the villains, because he was obsessed with getting revenge on the man who slaughtered his village. But little did he know, the man he was working directly under was the very same man. This works out perfectly though, as he was still a kid when this all happened, so he just clung on to whatever idea he was told by the mysterious old man. For Ryoga, he eventually does find his father and Arcadus, but not in the way he expected, as in truth, Arcadus is a title granted to those who complete a trial. In return for the immense abilities and power of Arcadus, Ryoga's father brought upon a temporary peace. But this was at the cost of his own life, leaving behind his family and friends for the greater good, which is a trait mentioned by a lot of characters. All of his old friends mentioned the fact that he was a brave man who did what they couldn't. But due to his sacrifice, we see a lot of these people enjoying their lives with their family now. Ryoga is also the same, and upon finding this out, Ryoga doesn't shy away from things, instead taking it upon himself to finish what his father started. And I think for all those reasons, Pokémon would rather you not remember this manga, if they had to pick one to promote. I say knowing they barely promote any of their mangas. The entire concept was a big risk, and ultimately didn't pay off the way they intended to, so they chose to leave it under the rug. Kinda like a lot of the Generation 5 material during this period, Pokémon were feeling very experimental with their spin-offs and how far they could reach with things, like Conquest, Rumble, and heck, even Typing Adventure. But like all of those games, this manga didn't take off, and sadly, that's probably for the best. If it did though, maybe instead of Pokken, we would have gotten a ReBURST game. I do truly wonder though, if this manga came out today, would it get received in the same way that it did back then? Nowadays, people are way more forgiving and open to different ideas. For better and for worse, of course, but it's just some food for thought. I think it's best for you to read the story for yourself and decide whether or not you enjoy it. You'd probably be able to tell from the first 3 chapters. But for those of you who have read it, now's your time to tell me what you think of this manga. Is the concept too outlandish for you, or something you can mess with? Let me know in the comment section down below. And for those of you who haven't read it, let me know if you want me to make a full video covering it. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe for more Pokemon manga content. With all that said and done, I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.